Welcome to the Book Flood podcast brought to you by goldenlibraries.com. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Deborah Salyer. Deborah is an international speaker with 30 years of experience in the classroom and school libraries. She spent a handful of years in the bookseller market and professional development with MediaSource. She is currently the California TeachingBooks Implementation and Training Specialist, which brings her back to work with former librarian colleagues. Deborah is also a senior presenter with 21 years of experience at the Bureau of Education and Research. Her current seminar is the annual What's New in Children's Books, K6, where she travels across the country doing book reports. Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks, Tom. I'm delighted to join you.
So I should tell you, the first time that I became aware that there was a Deborah was long ago at a CSLA. It was my first CSLA, and they said, "Well, you're going to her presentation, aren't you? Everybody goes." I'm not wrong, because that was the for elementary books. That
Oh,
was
right.
the place. So why don't you start a little bit by telling us about your journey to becoming a librarian?
Oh, that's quite the story. It probably goes all the way back to when I was a kid and my mom would take us to the public library, right? And I would come out with an armload of books, and I had a great librarian who let me read the same thing every week for weeks and weeks, and she just knew that someday I would just be, ready to move on. And so she let me do that. And then I always loved language and writing and reading. So when I got to college, I had no idea what I was going to do with that. And so I was an English major because it's what I know how to do. And then as a tutor, I realized the kids that were coming into freshman class didn't know how to write. And I went, someone must teach them to write. I'll do it. And so I changed my minor to secondary education. And that's how I got into education as a high school English teacher. And then I don't know, the stars lined up, and somehow I ended up with years in middle school. So, middle school, that's a calling, right? You either can do it or you hate your job.
Oh,
It's
you are so right. I did the
right.
same, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be a Gumby and be flexible. And I loved that job. I loved that job. But sad story is we had a librarian who was kind of like the library dragon.
Oh,
Yeah, and she would only let us send 5 kids at a time to the library.
in a
So
middle school?
in a middle school,
Oh my.
and she wouldn't let me bring my whole class in. So we didn't do any research. Wasn't there to help guide them find just right books. And I would go to her and I'd say, it takes me 2 days to get my whole class in. Couldn't I just bring them? We could be in and out and we're done. We're out of your hair, blah, blah, blah. Nope, that's just not going to work for me. So I did a very bad thing, Tom.
What did you do? You
Uh, you
brought the
know,
whole class.
karma is a bad thing, right? So I said to all my colleagues on my hall on Friday at 1, I want you to send your most challenging children to the library in your little groups of 5. And so at 1 o'clock, it looked like, what was that? OK Corral. There are all these children coming down the hall to the library. And then on Monday, I got called to the library and she said, I've been thinking what you asked about. Maybe it would be fine if you just brought your whole class. And so I went, you know what? It is not supposed to be like that. I will become a librarian so I can save all the children. And so I became um, a school librarian. And eventually it brought me, I won the Media Specialist of the Year, Teacher of the Year in South Carolina, which is where I did most of my classroom teaching.
Oh,
And then I took my trophy, my crown, and I came out to San Diego, where they don't even know they need a librarian. And I went, oh my gosh, because when I got there was almost 200 schools.
right.
And And I think at that time there were 32 teacher librarians. Most of my people were somebody's mama who didn't want the library to be dark. And here's the key, go and be the librarian. And so,
Oh,
um,
wow.
yeah, so I get out there and I had no idea it was going to be like that. And I got offered a position at La Jolla Elementary, which was going to be 3 hours a day. And they paid for the position with funding from the farmers market that they had every Sunday. And they said, we'll get more money and we'll add you some hours. And then I was
So I
interviewed.
feel a little context is necessary. So San Diego Unified is the second
Yes.
largest school district in California. Only Los
Yes.
Angeles is larger. So they've got to have a budget that's in the billions of dollars.
Yes. But they don't use it for library staffing.
Oh my.
I used to tell people it's like Chick-fil-A. They have no idea what they're missing because, as you know, Tom, um, years ago, they sent the teacher librarians back to the classroom because anybody can check out books, right? It was a budget crisis or whatever. And so
Right.
these so many places in California, throughout California, they don't know what they're missing. They don't know what it's like to have a full library staff like I had in the Southeast. And so I interviewed for the district librarian position when at that time I was just going to work with elementary library staff, and it was 5 hours. And it was 9/11 when I had my interview. And my then interview person, who was the program manager for library services, she said to me, "Do you want to help just the rich children in La Jolla, or do you want to help all the children of San Diego?" And those children. I said, I want to help all the children, right? So I took that little 5 hour a day job. And then over the course of 12 years, it morphed into a whole different ballgame. And so now, ironically, I am back working in California from one end of the state to the other, being the Oprah for teaching books. You get teaching books, and you get teaching books, and you get teaching books. So that's my journey to being a librarian.
So tell
A
us a little
long
bit
and
about
winding road.
uh, definitely. Tell us a little bit about teaching books,
So
which by the
teaching.
way, I have said many, many times in public and in private, must be my favorite resource for libraries.
Oh,
Must be.
I. That's a good question. I uh, San Diego Unified, we did have money in those early days back when the California Library Act was there, and I got money to buy sets of books for the school districts, and we got money for the instructional media center when we had an adoption, but we also had a separate budget for databases. And so that was, databases was just kind of coming into the world, right? And
Hmm.
so right away we bought teaching books, and it's got such a great origin story. I mean, the founder, Nick Glass, was working on an upper degree in cultural, I can never remember what it's called, but something about cultural diversity in education. And so it brought in diversity, equity, the whole shebang. And while he's working on this credential, this degree, he's working at the House of Pooh Corner, a um, children's bookstore. And he saw what happened when kids sat at the feet of an author and made that connection. And in his equity focused mind, he went, wait a minute, not every child will ever have those same experiences. How can I bring the authors and illustrators to the children and teens the moment they're reading the book? And so because his brain was database oriented, he wrote this program. And so it's 20 something years later, and now it's what you use if you want to know how to say the author's name, if you want to know why the author wrote that book, or how the illustrator got the idea to do those illustrations. But then it's also grown into, it's a place where you can get vocabulary. It's a place where you can get multi-level lessons, lesson plans, discussion questions, and now there's games. I mean, it's just, and now even just recently we added phonics and phonemic awareness. So
Oh
we
my.
matched, with science of reading, which is starting to pick up speed. Some people need a little extra direction with phonics. So what we've done is we've taken books you already have in your classroom or your library and identified this book will also help you reinforce short A, short, but they're not those decodables. They're the books that you go, oh, I love this story, but look, it's a short A, or I love this story, but look, there's a long O. So it's really just, so my heart is full. I mean, I'm all been about equality and equity and I would just want to be helpful. And so to be able to just give them that gift from the state library as part of the Compass resources, it just fills my heart up.
Well, a couple things. One is Nick's going to be on in a few weeks.
Oh,
Um,
yay.
yeah.
He'll tell that
Uh,
story, so you'll know if I told it right.
oh, there you go. I'm always telling stories wrong. It's okay.
Yeah.
But one of the things and I like so many things about teaching books, but one of the things that I like is you don't have to go out. It's not something, particularly in California, where now the California State Librarian has said it's
It's your
yours for
gift.
free.
Yeah, it's your tax dollars at work.
Yeah, exactly. For both uh, public schools, private schools, and libraries.
Yes, it's
Um,
for, I mean, it literally is for anyone in California, residents included. If you were in California and you go to teachingbooks.net and you're in California, you can get in. And I think where you were going with it, it's also everything you need all in one place but the book.
it is. It is. I don't have to go out.
You
Library
don't have to go to
budgets
teacher
are
pay teachers, you don't have to write your own lesson plans, So even if you've
right.
been teaching the same thing, till you're just, it's like a poke in the eye because, oh yeah, I got to teach Hamlet again this year.
Right.
There are things there that are new and interesting, um, to make it also interesting for those that do it as well. Um, One of my favorite, because one of the things, because I've been part of the State School Library Association in California since I
Mm.
got there in 2001, so almost 25 years now. And at some point, you said that about you have to go to her class or whatever. So it's gotten to be a thing where it started in Southern California that I wanted to do something helpful. So I said, you can win me. And so there's this at Southern section in the fall, there's a chance drawing where you put your tickets in there. And if you win, I will come to your school or district and do whatever you say.
That is very cool.
It is one of the most scary weekends of my life because I'm a planner. And back then, when we started it, that meant that on Monday I would go somewhere in California. And you know, you live there. It's big.
It is big. This is not like, okay, we're the Rhode Island Association, so
Right. Right. So I was mostly going to be in Southern at that point, but one of the times I was was at Garden Grove High School, and the librarian there said, I said, "What do you want me to do?" She said, "I want you to show me how to get people to use teaching books." She said, "So I'm just going to put you out in the quad, and I'll point out the teachers, and you just do your thing." And I went, "Okay." I don't know what that means, but I'll try. So the first person that she saw was the art teacher.
Mm,
And we don't always think of art and literature together, though we absolutely should, right?
right.
Um, so she saw the art teacher. So I went up, I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Deborah Salyer. I work with teaching books, and that's something you get from the state. So I'm curious, what are you teaching with your students? She said, "Oh, I'm teaching collage." I said, "Oh, I'm going to send you something to your email. So check your email when you get back to your classroom." So I go to the library and I use a little share tool. That's one of the
Hmm.
things I love about teaching books is you can click on the little red arrow and give it to whoever, and they don't have to know anything. And so I went back, and there's a movie where we went into Brian Collier's house, and he talks about his collage process and shows things, right? So I sent that to her. Well, the next thing I know, she's running back to the library or running down to the library. That video is perfect. So, a couple of questions. What else do you have? Do we have his books? And the next thing I'm going to teach is this. What do you have on that? And it was just like that. And she went, "Oh," I said, "Yeah, you just, what's their need and how can you meet it?" And then
Right.
I walked down by a classroom, and she was teaching of mice and men. And I didn't even say anything to her. I just went back to the library and I used the share tool and I sent the mice and men, you know, page to her. As Back when I first became a librarian, I used to do a workshop in South Carolina called 10 Reasons to Be a Media Specialist, which is what they call you over there.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things I used to tell people is that you get to help, right? I mean, that's your job, to help. How can I help? How can I support? How can I collaborate? And then I also did another one, 10 reasons why you want to be a librarian. And it used to be you get your own office, right? And you got your own phone, you got your own bathroom. Uh, but one of the things to be successful, I think, in this business is being proactive, right? So you know what they need, you know what you're going to teach. And so you just, sometimes they don't know what they don't know.
Right. Well, it
We're
is.
busy. We're all busy.
It's a very common story. Mine was it was a little bit like that. Is uh, I would get people that would come up to me after I started saying, "How do you know how to do these things, and why haven't we ever done them before?" And I was in library school. Trust me, I was not doing anything that was that amazing. But sometimes you have that person that came before you, and they viewed the
Right,
job differently, which
right,
actually, to my thinking, is the best way to go. But yeah, they often have no idea what teacher librarians, what media specialists do.
right, right. In fact, um, I used to have this video that I um, made, a day in the life of the librarian, and it starts off with Aunt Betty doing. So Aunt Betty is a character that I do. She's a little old Southern lady, and
So you say you do this, but for our listeners, this is a whole event, is it not?
it is. I mean, it truly is. I know that the vendors in the exhibit hall are probably glad that she doesn't come to that anymore, because we used to do this book cart drill team, and Aunt Betty would be the MC, and nobody would be at the booth because everybody wanted to see what Aunt Betty was going to do or say.
Right.
So yeah, um, but where was I going with that? Aunt Betty. But I digress. My mother tells people it takes three of us to tell a story because we're Southern, right? The first one starts the story, second one interrupts and tells it the correct way, and the third to tell us where we were going to begin with.
Think you were going to talk a little bit about the day-to-day work life.
Oh, the day of the life. So Aunt Betty made this tongue-in-cheek little video where she's eating chocolate and talking on the phone and reading the newspaper and, you know, just having a lovely day in the library. And then it morphs to what a real day looks like. And so you see all these snippets of helping kids find the just right book and stopping what you're doing to fix something, and all those things, because I mean it's just like with any job. That's why remember that years ago there was some sort of job where the boss would slip in and nobody knew he was the boss, and he would
Oh,
watch
right.
and see what goes on, because we're all busy with our own jobs. And that's why I also say, you got to toot your horn. People don't, if they don't know what you're doing, some of that's on you. You
Oh,
got
right.
to, and it's not bragging, it's communication. You want them to know what they have access to and how you can help them. You want to clear up. Sometimes, like you were saying, you got to change the culture sometimes. And sometimes that takes time.
Years sometimes, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, who are the authors that you personally like to buy and read?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me that. You know,
Hmm.
it's I that's a very good question. I don't really have a great answer to that because I'm very lucky that, when you said in my intro that I do book reports, that's what my mother tells people I do. She does book reports for a living, which is true. People think I've always been like that. I can remember back when I was classroom teacher, the other language arts teachers would, if they were doing, book reports and they thought the kid hadn't read the book, they would say, "Do I need to send you down to," and they were like, "No, I didn't read the book. Don't send me to her. I know she if she hadn't read it, she's going to read it tonight and I'll be busted. So just fine." Um, yeah, my favorite story was Pierre, who told me finally after 4 months he read a book, and he's in the 8th grade. He's never read anything, and all of a sudden he's read Wuthering Heights.
Wow.
I went, "Huh, good for you. What's it about?" He said, "Oh, it's a love story about Heathcliff and Catherine." And I go, "Okay, so far so good." Then what happened? "Oh, they fell in love, but they couldn't get married." I said, "How come?" He goes, "Well, she walked out of her house and got hit by a car one day." I said, "Pierre, honey, they didn't have cars during in Wuthering Heights. She might have been run over by a horse and carriage, but they did not have cars." He goes, "Yeah, I didn't really read the book." So, so I do. I read so many things, and I'm so lucky that I love to read. And I
Hmm.
also feel lucky that I can read not only different grade bands, but lots of different genre. And so for my other thing that I do, the What's New in Children's Literature, I literally, people will talk about an adult book and I'll go, "I'll be right back." Cause I am just now starting to make time to read adult books, but I read K to 12 all the time. Like,
Right.
oh, I don't have it closed somewhere. Um, because I was on a plane, I got to read a lot. But I told some of the ladies I was with this weekend on my retreat that I went to, like, Candace Fleming, I would read if she wrote her grocery list out. I probably would read that. I just what she writes either makes me laugh or makes me think or makes me want to know more. Um, I was telling my manager this morning, Gary Schmidt, who wrote Okay for Now and the Wednesday Wars. Um, he has a new book out this year that's YA. It's Jupiter Rising. It's the sequel to Orbit in Jupiter that he wrote 9 years ago. And something
Hmm.
about the way he writes, first of all, I know I'm going to need a box of tissues, right? As Aunt Betty
Yeah.
would say, it's a tissue book. And so I cried the whole time. But then the second you're finished, you want to go back and you want to read the book that came in front of it. Or in his case, because he's got a real power of taking this one standalone story, but somebody in there is connected to something else he wrote. So I have
Hmm.
read his stuff over and over. And so he writes middle grade mostly, but like most authors, he writes a little bit of YA and some for K to 3. And then, of course, Kate DiCamillo, right?
Oh,
I don't care.
right.
I don't care what she writes, blog post, Facebook.
A little bit, she's the queen.
She is, I always feel like she and Jane Yolen, I don't know, should we curtsy when we say their name? Should we, put a little crown on our head? I don't know. But, I really love nonfiction too. So
Oh, so do I.
that's my passion. So I've been working some with Melissa Stewart and hashtag Kids Love Nonfiction to, get more FaceTime for nonfiction. Because if you ask most people what their favorite book is, they're going right to fiction.
Right.
But like Melissa, I mean, she's prolific and she's so smart and she writes such great informational text that makes you want to do more. Or Steve Schenken, who can write um, nonfiction that feels like a Tom Cruise movie, right?
Right.
Uh, or like they have a new book. He and Ruta Sepetys wrote this book called The Bletchley Riddle. Oh my gosh. I had two lines I wanted to stand in during
On my little card right here.
oh Yeah.
Yep. Want to
At,
buy it.
at ALA, I had two lines I wanted to stand in. One, in Raina Telgemeier to get a book for my granddaughter, and two, to get my very own copy of Bletchley, because somehow I didn't get an advance copy, and I was dying to read it.
Right.
Um, but that's the thing. We're like in a golden age of so many things. I know this, because I know you had that librarian on your
Amanda
podcast.
Jones,
Yeah, and I bless her heart. She's doing such good work in spite of a horrible situation. And for some of us, many of us, even my work has changed because of this issue. Um, but in spite of that, some of the best children's and teen books are being written right now and published right now this minute. You know, mashups. I finished a book on a plane called Westfallen by Amy Brashears and her brother. And it's a reimagining of what would happen if Hitler and Germany had won World War II
mm,
through the lens of time travel and a shortwave radio and changing one or two things and what happens then and how can we fix it, right? So it's a thriller, it's historical fiction, it's science fiction, so there's a lot of mashup kind of stuff going with fiction. But with nonfiction, we're telling those stories of the unrepresented people, whether they're a woman who didn't get credit like Rosalind Franklin, um, Tanya Lee Stone's new book, um, who took the picture that told us what DNA was. Yet her colleagues ran with the picture and her data and got a Nobel Prize.
which is
And
unfortunately a common
is
story.
very common. Is very common.
Right.
So as I look to what's next in my life in my chapters, what's my, I'm not gonna. At some point, I'm gonna take a new path, and I've decided to quit waiting for when that path happens, and I've started writing nonfiction myself.
Oh, excellent.
So
Uh,
I'm
Anything you
looking
want to
for.
tell us about that?
Well, it started once upon a time with a visit to Hoover Dam where I learned about corduroy pants, and you could get fired if you didn't come to work because there were plenty of other people who could take your job, and they were on a deadline. And so men would change their names so they could go back to work after they took time off for whatever the reason was. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write a story about that. But then I went, why wouldn't I tell a true story about a woman who was there at the same time? And I discovered through my research this woman, Ida Browder, who came from royalty in Austria Hungary in 1905. And she was the first unofficial mayor, started the first school library, the first public library, built one of the first four successful restaurants, and nobody knows her name.
That would be a good book.
Yeah. So I'm writing
Someone
that
should
right
write
now.
that book.
I am. I'm writing it right now. Why wait? What and that's advice I would give to anybody who's still, boots on the ground is don't wait. If you have a
Mm.
passion somewhere, whether it's writing or a hobby, don't wait. Don't wait. We are all better when we are multifaceted.
You will definitely have to come back on the podcast after you get published. That would be wonderful.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much, Deborah, for being with us today. For those who would like to see what Deborah is up to, for those that would like to contact her, in the show notes will be a website and email address. Also, wherever you listen to podcasts, please like, share, and subscribe. That helps us out on the back end, if you will. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Deborah.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.